What did you feel you would accomplish by killing them?
Nothing.
Nothing, eh? Okay. And what caused you to just do this?
I don't know.
This is Cameron Rogers, and this surveillance camera shows the moments in which he awkwardly confesses to murdering his mother and father. Through this case, it will become evident to you that Cameron is a very disturbing individual. But what caused him to commit such heinous actions to those who loved him the most? And what were the horrific events which unfolded on that fateful day? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my friends. My name is Adrian, and welcome back to another video by Coffeehouse Crime. Today we're looking at the case of Cameron Rogers. The surveillance footage capturing Cameron's confession is quite notorious in Canada. But what exactly was the story behind it? And by the way, did you know that I post solved, unsolved, and strange cases here weekly? So if that's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to Coffeehouse Crime. We're diving straight into this one, my friends, so please grab a coffee and sit back. This is the case of Cameron Rogers. Today, we once again travel to the vast and rugged lands of Canada. Canada is a country that is often covered here on Coffeehouse Crime, but Canada is actually one of the safest countries you could live in. When it comes to landmass, it's the second largest country in the world, only coming after Russia. Many mountains and woodlands populate its terrain, and almost half of Canada's land is covered in forest. With thanks to its relatively small population, if you stray too far from a town or city, you'll find yourself to be entirely alone with nature. You will also find distinctively modern and progressive cities in their urban hotspots. And today, we're keeping it urban by visiting the country's capital, Ottawa, a very beautiful city nestled on the banks of its namesake river. Ottawa holds a population of 1.5 million residents, many of which are migrants, which of course is evidence that Ottawa is a very desirable place to live. And here we find the Rogers family, in the riverside suburb of Rideauvieux. Small in size, the Rogers consist of Dave and Merrill Gleddy Rogers, along with their 22-year-old adopted son, Cameron Rogers. In the year 2016, Dave and Merrill were older parents, aged 69 and 63 years old. They adopted Cameron in their 40s, but they didn't let their age stop them from any activities that any younger parents could do. Dave Rogers was an Ottawan through and through. He was born and raised here, graduated from a nearby high school, and went to Carleton University, in which he obtained 2 degrees in political science and journalism. This education eventually led to Dave being hired by the Ottawa Citizen, a local newspaper outlet, where he gladly dedicated his entire professional career until retiring 37 years later. He was known to be a man with a positive outlook on life. No matter what the awful things he had to witness and report on through his line of work, he never complained and always got the job done. Merrill, on the other hand, was tough as nails. She was born into a military family in Alberta, and carrying on the family tradition, she joined the Canadian military after achieving a linguistics degree at the University of Ottawa. Due to her name being mistaken for a man, she was enrolled onto the men's combat training. And, as it turns out, she became one of the first 4 women to complete the entire combat course, even going on to help design future training for recruits. Dave and Merrill would one day meet at a cycling group in Ottawa, and fast forward 2 years after this, they had married and started their adventurous lives together. The pair would often travel to France and loved the country dearly. The two of them were bilingual, which, unfortunately, is a dying skill in Canada. The couple had always wanted to start a family of their own, but for reasons kept private, they never conceived any children, and instead they went down the avenue of adoption. Now, the Rogers family were perfect applicants for adoption, and it didn't take long for them to receive an offer either. That is when, in the year 1994, they welcomed the newborn Cameron into their lives. The couple naturally took to parenthood, and those around the family noted they were entirely devoted to Cameron. They centered their lives around him, and loved him unconditionally. They always gave him their full, undivided attention. So when Cameron began to struggle at school, they suspected that maybe he had some learning difficulties. Their son was eventually diagnosed with ADHD and expected autism, but this diagnosis didn't affect their love for Cameron in the slightest. They were simply better able to support him and his needs. Cameron grew up seemingly happy, and his parents gave him many fantastic experiences and opportunities. Some of those being trips overseas, cruises, and plenty of time in Canada's great outdoors. But after graduating from high school, Cameron didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, nor did he seem too bothered to find out. This worried Dave and Merrill, so eventually they convinced him to enroll into college, where, just like myself, he studied mechanical engineering. Although Cameron agreed, he saw this decision as his parents trying to control him, when in reality they were trying to set Cameron up for a bright future. You see, they were getting older and wanted to make sure that Cameron could provide for himself. Although his education would help build a career and provide financial support in the future, Cameron also wanted to get a part-time job while studying. But Dave and Merrill didn't think this was a good idea, and instead they wanted him to focus on his studies. In their warm-hearted nature, they therefore decided to make a generous compromise. Whatever he wanted to buy, he could get for free, in return for some gardening work or household chores. But Cameron absolutely hated this arrangement. He didn't like the idea of having to specify what exactly he was buying all the time. Granted, Dave and Merrill were simply trying to help out, but this didn't mean much to Cameron. He didn't have any desire to complete his course anyway. Resentment followed Cameron. In his mind, his parents controlled his every move, and whether that be his studies, his finance, or his job, that feeling stayed with him. As a result, arguments frequently broke out between him and his parents, often resulting in shouting and screaming between the three. But despite this, nothing ever changed. It was always the same old story. This frustration grew over time, and although Cameron could just about control these emotions below the surface, it was only a matter of time before these feelings would boil over. Even still, the consequence to all of this would be far greater than anyone could have ever imagined. November the 20th, 2016 began like any other day. The Rogers family had been invited to a birthday party later that afternoon. They agreed to attend, and furthermore promised to bring a party dish over in return. But as the afternoon arrived and the clocks hit their invitation time, the Rogers family were nowhere to be seen. Hours passed, and come evening, it was apparent that they were not going to make the night's events. Friends reached out to ask if everything was alright, but there was no response. And as the days of silence began to mount up, relatives and close friends started to worry. The Rogers were a reasonably private family, so no one felt enough urgency behind their silence to call law enforcement for a welfare check. Maybe they'd taken Cameron out of town for the week. Saying that, some of the neighbours did recall seeing a dim light coming from one of the bedrooms at night, but maybe it was on a timed switch. However, after 9 long days of silence and 120 miles away, a very awkward yet harrowing phone call was made to 911.
That's 911.
Hello?
Hello.
I would like to confess to a murder.
Okay. Well, so where are you?
I actually, I'm on a street, in Montreal. I don't know where that street is.
Well, you need to know if you want me to send somebody.
Yeah, that's true, Wayne. I'm near a parking garage.
Okay, you need to be more specific. I need an address or intersection.
I'm going to find the street name. An address. Oh, that might work. I'm going to go up to the corner of the street to see the street name.
And who did you kill?
My mom and dad.
Okay. Where do they live?
They live in Ottawa.
And what's your name?
My name is Cameron.
Cameron
Rogers.
How old are you?
I'm 22.
22. Okay. Are you gonna stay on the corner?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I will.
Okay. I'll send somebody to go and talk to you and just see what's going on. Okay.
The caller was Cameron Rogers, and throughout this phone call, it's evident that he wasn't fully sure what he was doing. Neither did he realise the gravity of his situation. As they collected Cameron from the side of the road, officers were dispatched to the home of Dave and Merrill. And as they got there, at 10 PM that night, they found the gruesome discovery of 2 bodies. The 2 had tragically been stuffed behind a shed in their back garden, Dave found inside a suitcase and Merrill inside a tarp. And due to Canada's harsh winter, both of their bodies had frozen over. Needless to say, but police immediately took Cameron into custody before charging him with the murder of Dave and Merrill Rogers. Interrogation started the very next morning.
Okay, so how you doing?
Good.
Good, you're okay?
Yeah.
Alright. Do you remember my name?
No.
You just met me for the first time,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, okay. So my name's Teresa.
Okay.
I'm with the Ottawa Police, and I'm a police officer, and I work in the Major Crime Unit, alright? So I met you for the very first time today, right?
Cameron seemed confused throughout his questioning, but the interrogator, Teresa Kelm, took a light and understanding approach to him, and it never seemed as if Cameron was lying throughout his answers.
What did you feel you would accomplish by killing them?
Nothing.
Nothing, eh? Okay. And what caused you to just do this?
I don't know, it was...
Although Cameron was stuttering, he never hesitated to tell the interrogator what she wanted to know. He just seemed entirely aloof throughout the process.
I don't know what made me do it. It was just... like... I don't...
So, what exactly happened to Dave and Merrill Rogers? And what had caused Cameron to murder his loving parents? It turns out that on the first day of the family's silence, Merrill was preparing herbs, which she would add to the dish she was planning to take to the party. With Cameron nearby, she had asked him if he could cut the melon for her, which he begrudgingly accepted. The family had one of their usual arguments the previous night, and, unfortunately, even after sleeping, Cameron was still in a bad mood over it. Cameron took the melon and laid it down on the chopping board. Selecting a knife from the drawer, he began to cut away, all while ruminating over the events of last night. He was sick to the teeth of being told what to do, and wanted to be able to live his life his own way. While staring down at the knife, slicing through the melon's flesh, his mind deviated into the realm of disturbing thoughts. He began to fantasize about how easy it would be to turn to his mother and use the knife on her. If his parents were no longer around, they could no longer control him, after all.
I guess this is one thing I'm just trying to understand. So you're cutting melons, and what was your mom doing?
She was like, doing something, some kind of herb thing. I don't know what it was. It was just, she was grinding herbs or something.
Okay. And how was that morning? This was around 11 o'clock. So what was going on that morning in the house?
I don't know. I mean, like, what was...
Did you have an argument with your parents, or...?
Well, I mean, the whole upstanding, or not upstanding, the whole, like, disagreement about school and work and all that was just hanging over me, and I mean, I guess, like, I mean, we've had arguments before.
Okay.
And heated, yelling ones, and I guess just at that time when the cloud broke, I was chopping a melon.
After 50 minutes of absurd deliberation, Cameron's decision was finally made. He wandered over to the garage and collected a wooden stake. Although the stake's purpose was never intended for violence, that would unfortunately all change. He returned to the kitchen, walked up to his mother, and stabbed her square in the back. Merrill screamed out in pain as she fell to the floor, and although the stake was not sharp enough to kill, it did cause significant injury and pain. Cameron's actions would not go unnoticed, as David heard his wife screaming from across the house. The frightened man stood up and rushed towards the kitchen, only to find Cameron standing above Merrill. Before he could fully comprehend what was going on, Cameron thrust the stake into his father's chest, puncturing his lung in the process. And grabbing 2 knives from the kitchen counter, Cameron took both parents in turn, stabbing them multiple times. Hours passed, but Merrill was still on the floor of the kitchen, groaning in pain. Cameron had stayed outside of the room to wait for her to die, as he couldn't bear being with her during that moment.
Alright. And your mom, you said she was in the kitchen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And where was your dad?
He was somewhere else, I don't know exactly.
Okay. Can you just explain to me how your dad, did it both happen in the kitchen? Okay. How does your dad end up in the kitchen?
Well, when I did my mom, he came running, and then I did him.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. And how long did it take?
What do you mean?
Like before your mom, like how long did you?
Well, my dad didn't take very long, but my mom took a long time.
Okay.
That's when the phone rang in the kitchen, and not wanting to be suspicious, Cameron picked up the phone. He heard the voice of his uncle, Graham, asking to speak to his sister. Cameron replied back with a lie, telling his uncle that Meryl was ill and resting in bed, and that everything was fine. But all in the meanwhile, just meters away from the phone, Meryl lay dying on the floor.
And it was really hard because she was in pain, and I wanted it to stop, and I couldn't make it stop. And I felt so bad because she was in pain, and I wanted her not to be in pain, but I couldn't stop it. And it went for the whole night.
And what?
It took the whole night for her to die.
And how do you know that it took the whole night?
I don't know exactly, but I mean, I went to my room, and she was still in pain. I could hear her, but then in the morning, it was done.
Okay.
Although Dave would pass away almost instantly, it took hours for Meryl to die. Her final moments were sure to be in agony, both physically and emotionally. She had been betrayed by the son she had raised and loved, a son who was upstairs waiting for her to pass. If Cameron had called 911 after his assault, perhaps he could have saved her life, but this is something we will sadly never know. His next plan of action was to get rid of the bodies, or at least move them. Cameron then proceeded to make his way downstairs, wrap their bodies in a suitcase and tarp, move them behind a shed at the end of the garden, and then clean up the kitchen.
Why don't we talk about how did they get to the outside?
I put them there.
You put them there, okay. And when did you put them there?
After they died.
Okay. And how did you get them out to the back?
I had to, I dragged my mom in a tarp.
Okay.
And then I put my dad in a suitcase.
Okay.
And then pulled him out.
Okay, and how'd you get him in a suitcase?
Well, I sort of rolled him into it.
Okay. All right. Did you have to do anything to get him into the suitcase? Or?
Well, it wasn't like a perfect fit. Like, I didn't, like, make him, like, fit.
Okay.
Cameron's parents owned a steam cleaner, which, fortunate for him, he then used to clean the blood off the kitchen floor. He then discarded the knives and the broken steak, dumping them in the family's waste bin in the garage. Cameron's strategy to conceal his crime was almost as poor as his decision to take his parents' lives. Despite his cleaning efforts, he had no plan or intention to evade the law. He simply didn't want the extended family to see their bodies. Cameron stayed in the house for an entire week after murdering his parents, and during that time he spent most of it in his bedroom, only entering the kitchen to grab some food or a snack. Throughout his week-long hibernation, he then pondered what his next move would be. He knew that he couldn't stay in Canada, as no doubt he would be caught, but perhaps if he could cross the border, he would have a chance of starting a new life. Much like the decision to kill his parents, these thoughts were naive, impulsive, and thoughtless, but it's precisely what he would attempt to do. And so, after a week of deliberation, he emptied the contents of his mother's purse, took all the money he could, and left.
Right, so we're just going to try to figure, how did you get to Montreal?
Took the train.
Oh, you took the train, okay. And then how did you get from your house to, which train station did you go to?
Tremblay.
Tremblay Road, okay. And how did you get there?
I drove.
You drove whose vehicle?
My mom's.
Your mom's. And why didn't you just drive to Montreal?
Well, I have to pay for gas.
Okay.
And I mean, I didn't know if I didn't know, I probably could have, but I mean, if I had to pay for more gas, I wouldn't really be able to pay for more gas.
Right, okay. So you then took the train to Montreal?
Yeah.
And when did you arrive in Montreal?
At 8:30 on Monday.
Once in Montreal, Cameron purchased a bus ticket to New York. However, while at the border, he declared that he was looking to move to the US, and was therefore asked to present a visa, which obviously he could not produce. You see, Canadians don't need to produce a visa if they are simply visiting the United States. So, telling the officers at the border that he intended to move was very strange, and indicates how little he thought through his plan. Lost and alone, and with nowhere to go, Cameron wandered around the streets of Montreal trying to decide what to do next. The day was getting long in the tooth, and Cameron, he was tired. So at 9:15 PM, and 8 long days after murdering his parents, he decided to call 911. Everything that Cameron would later confess to was sadly proven to be a morbid reality, and in the 5 days that forensic teams had spent in the house, they found all the evidence required to incriminate him. And as for a motive as to why he killed David Merrill, there strangely wasn't one. Even during his interrogation, Cameron failed to highlight any strong reasoning.
So I know you're cutting melons, and that was about at 11 o'clock on the Sunday morning.
Yeah.
What caused you to do that? Like, it was something said or done, or...
No,
like,
it was literally just a spur of the moment. I don't even know. Like, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, took me 50 minutes of going back and forth about to do it and then not to do it.
Okay, all right. What was causing you to want to do it? Why is it you're thinking you wanted to do it?
I don't remember.
Okay, all right.
Following, well, all of this, Cameron was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, to which he would plead not guilty. His defense reasoned that it was a spur-of-the-moment crime, and that his diagnosis of autism meant he had diminished responsibility for his actions. This is despite him saying he only had slight autism during his interrogation. Cameron's defense didn't go well. His confession had highlighted that his crimes were not spur of the moment, since he had carefully weighed up his actions for almost 1 hour before proceeding. Leaving his mother to suffer on the kitchen floor for several hours, instead of calling for emergency help, would also prove his dangerous nature. Cameron also attempted to hide the bodies, made an effort to get rid of incriminating evidence, and had even tried to flee. All of which is evidence that he knew his actions were morally wrong. Cameron's trial began in December of 2018. The prosecution opened the trial by making their statements, and next it was time for Cameron's defense to speak. But this is when, out of the blue, Cameron told his lawyers that his father had sexually abused him for most of his life. This statement changed everything about the trial, and if true, it would change his defense team's direction quite immensely. But the question was, why had he not told them any time sooner? The trial was therefore declared as a mistrial, and ultimately the jury were dismissed, meaning that the judge would make all decisions on Cameron's fate from here on out. But while his defense team tried to get this new information out of Cameron, this is where his story crumbled, and he admitted that he made the allegation up in a panic. The trial continued without a jury several days later, and once this began, Cameron was subjected to 24 victim impact statements from the friends and family of David Merrill. These statements came from people Cameron had grown up with, and those who loved him very much. To avoid proceeding with the trial, the judge gave Cameron Rogers the option to plead guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, to which eventually he resigned. Cameron pleaded guilty to both, and therefore was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole for the next 20 years. This means that technically Cameron could be a free man in the year 2038. His family members, who are not related to him by blood, do not welcome this sentence, and instead they now fear for their safety in the future.
I think everyone wants to hear from Cameron the why. Ultimately, that is always the question from everyone. I think either from family, from the community at large, is they want to hear why. Why did you do this, Cameron? I think the fact that he lied and made these allegations against his father shows some of his character, shows some selflessness on his part, shows some willingness to try to get away with this. And that was shown at the onset.
I fear for the day he is released. I do. A lot of our extended family does. There were victim impact statements from family on the West Coast, family in the southern US. They're all very scared for us. because realistically, one day he will be released.
I'm not sure that I fully agree with Graham here, as, at least to me, it appears that Cameron requires psychological evaluation and support much more than he deserves to be feared. No doubt, this does not exclude the fact that he murdered both of his parents, and following his actions is dangerously unpredictable. But watching the full-hour video of his interrogation highlights a man who cannot fully comprehend or grasp his actions, and is genuinely remorseful. To add contrast to this, Cameron's actions were not instantaneous, as he spent almost an entire hour weighing up the idea, enough time to realise that his plans were cold and heartless. It is a very interesting discussion point, and one that I'm sure will bring many opinions to the table. But regardless, all opinions arrive at the same conclusion. As the sun goes down, we remember our real victims to this case, Dave and Merrill. For unknown reasons, Cameron had a misfortunate start to his life, but Dave and Merrill were there to do their best and give him a second chance. They adopted Cameron as a newborn child, and loved him unconditionally through every good and bad moment of his life. From the very first time he could stand up, and all the way through to graduating high school, they were there for him every step of the way. Dave and Merrill devoted 2 decades of their lives to Cameron, but their love and care would be thrown back in their faces in the most violent and cold way possible.
We're happy this is resolved. This is a horrible family tragedy. We never expected ever to find ourselves in such a situation.
Through their friends, their family, and the church, Dave and Merrill will be sorely missed. And many of those who also loved Cameron will now forever resent him. Cameron will have the chance to be released from prison at the age of 42, and although authorities do believe that he can be rehabilitated, he will first have to live the next quarter of his life in miserable loneliness. An all too expected price for murdering those who loved you the most. Thank you so much for watching another video today by Coffeehouse Crime. If you found this case interesting or you learned something new, then please remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. Wrapping it up here folks, I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. Do you think 20 years is enough time behind bars? Or do you think psychological evaluation is more pertinent to this case? Thank you again for watching folks, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon for another video. But until that moment arrives, please remember to look after each other and stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.